So my name is Yehudah Mirsky. I teach here at the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies and in the Department of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies. My courses tend to be Israel and Zionism, especially the intersection of religion, politics, and culture, courses in Jewish thought, as well as human rights. But enough about me. Now, our panel is entitled, Where Are We Going? So a wide question, to say the very least. And we have about an hour and a half or so to encompass the future. So concision will be of the essence, and yet, though, looking at our panelists, who I'm about to introduce in a moment, they are all individuals who have managed to do who've managed to squeeze a remarkable amount into rather short periods of time. And so I'm sure that our conversation will be as interesting as they are accomplished. So what I'm going to do is briefly introduce our panelists. Each one will speak for a few minutes, laying out the basics of their work and their sense of how their work fits into their general sense of the subject of our gathering, Israeli innovation in Israel. And then we'll be doing a lightning round where I ask some questions and we'll have some conversation and open the conversation to you. So I will share their bios with you right before they speak. And so first, we'll be hearing from Jacob Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the Senior Associate Dean for undergrad and master's programs and a senior lecturer in accounting at law at MIT. He oversees MIT Sloan's portfolio of degree programs and student services offices. He teaches Financial Accounting Israel Lab, an action learning course that partners MIT management and engineering students with Israeli startups. He also serves as MIT Sloan's Title IX officer, reminding us that all these things take place in societal contexts. From 2008-2011, he was dean of the MBA program at INSEAD, and he oversees strategy for campuses in France, Singapore, and Abu Dhabi, and U.S. partnerships with both Kellogg and Wharton, merely among two of the three finest business schools in the country. In 2012, he spent his post-deanship sabbatical teaching and conducting research at Cambridge and Oxford. And before his joining INSEAD in 2003, he was senior teaching fellow across the river at Harvard Business School. We're all taking class across the river, but across the river is our official title for Harvard around here, in the accounting and management group where he taught both MBAs and executive education students. And so, Dr. Cohen, so in a few minutes, if you could please share your work and your sense of how it fits into a broader landscape of Israeli innovation.
Great, thank you. It's funny, we call it across the river as well. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Yehudah and thank Jonathan for inviting me. It's nice to be at Brandeis. It's really a pleasure to be here and to learn more about the work that is happening here. So maybe a little about my course. First, I'm going to say that I know a little about Israel because I am also Israeli. So shalom lekulam. And the work I do now at MIT, Israel Lab, is really a passion project. So it's not really what I was hired to do. I was hired to be an administrator and hired to oversee and teach courses in finance and accounting. But as an Israeli, engaging with MIT students, I saw that there is a strong interest in innovation and entrepreneurship around the field of technology. And of course, Israel is very much a country focused on innovation and entrepreneurship and is very strong in technology. So I saw an immediate match. And what we did is we developed a course called Israel Lab, which is an action learning course. We have a portfolio of courses that are action learning courses that believe that maybe the pedagogy that is quite important for students is one where they're learning by doing. So we partner them up with Israeli startups. In November, December, they work remotely. They work from MIT, and they get on FaceTime and various phone calls with Israeli startups in the field of technology mostly, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, fintech. advanced life sciences, and others. And they start to scope out a project that is important for the management team in Israel. And they use the libraries, they use the resources of MIT to try to hone in on the work that they're going to do on the ground when they arrive in Israel. And then in January, they spend 3 weeks there. And it's a course that I like to think of as 24/7/21. So 24 hours a day, they're going to be in teams with students. They're going to work together and live together. These are students that they don't necessarily know. They come from across the portfolio of programs. They could be undergraduate, they could be MBAs, they could be our Sloan fellows who are 40-year-old executives. And they're going to work and live with them in Tel Aviv. And they're going to be there for 3 weeks, engaging with the startups and trying to really understand what makes Israel a startup nation. And the whole point of the course is really to decipher and decode kind of the essence of that ecosystem, what makes it special. And the course attracts a great number of students. I cap it. There's a cap of 32 students, but there's a healthy wait list. And the students work on teams of 4. So we work with 8 companies that we source through the venture capital firms. And again, they add a lot of value to the organizations in Israel, the companies in Israel, and they learn a lot. They learn a lot about the culture. They learn about the work environment in Israel. And they gain a great appreciation for what makes it unique and special. None of the students are Israeli, even though we do have quite a number of Israeli students at MIT. Truthfully, I think the number of Jewish students is at most 2 or 3. Most of the students are not Jewish, and they're just very interested in what's happening there. They come from China, they come from Brazil, they come from Germany, they come from Singapore, and they want to understand why that ecosystem is so successful. What makes it so vibrant for startups? What makes it so rich in innovation? And that's really the point of the course. We've run it now for 4 years. It's been quite successful in terms of student evaluations and enrollments. More students interested in every year. And this year will be the 5th year. We look forward to being in Israel in January. And again, we do many things, but it's also to engage the culture, to understand what makes the society there different. So that's the course.
Now, I can't, because there's questions on the tip of my tongue, and I'm sure on the tip of many people. So tell us, in your experience, what is the essence of this startup ecosystem? Well, you opened a very wide door.
So truthfully, I don't think there's one ingredient that explains it all. It's really a combination. It's a combination of the fact that Israel is a country of immigrants, and immigrants are risk takers. It's a country of people who like to try new things, and failure is not going to stop them. In fact, the tolerance for failure in Israel is much higher than it is in other countries. Our students from Japan or others, the fear of bankruptcy can really prevent them from trying. But in Israel, you try, you fail, big deal. You try again. And that's important. The role of the military is very important. And the role of the military is important in a number of ways. One is leadership development. The fact that at 18, you go into the military, and by age 19, 20, or 21, you could be commanding. That provides leadership experience to very young individuals that if you compare them to peers across the world, they just don't get that. You know, being a president of a fraternity in the US is very different from a commander leading troops into Gaza. And the other thing is, of course, the commercialization of military technology. Many of the companies we work with they were started by people who left 8200, the intelligence unit, and they started companies. And they take that technology, not exactly the same, but they take the technology and they find commercial applications for it. And that is very attractive to companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Intel and Cisco's. So again, all that together leads to a unique ecosystem that's not really easy to replicate. So people from Singapore, people from China, and I apologize, I arrived from China just a few days ago, so I'm still jet lagged, and for me it's, about 1 a.m. I should be sleeping now. But even in China, when I presented in Beijing, what they wanted to know and what I presented about was Israel Lab. And they want to understand the ecosystem. All-powerful China wants to really understand what's happening in the tiny country in the Middle East because of the technology, because of the innovation, and because of the success of the ecosystem. So that's really what the course is about. The course tries to understand that a little more and provide our students with action learning, learning by doing, learning by experiencing it, by being there and working day in, day out with the Israeli startup executives.
Very good. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Beginning. And so now we're going to hear from Shana Krakowski. Shana Krakowski is director of the Platform, which is a municipal innovation center run by the city of Tel Aviv-Yafo, the Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality, through Tel Aviv Global. The Platform aims to develop local entrepreneurship as well as urban social solutions to municipal challenges. Before coming to the Platform, Shana directed Microfi, which is a microfinance NGO that works to develop small business among marginalized populations. So we're going to be able to hear from her really insightful things, and judging from our conversation that we and I had last night, really insightful things about these interfaces between civil society, NGOs, municipal government, and all the tech and innovative stuff that we're talking about. She's also worked as director of recruitment for the Israel Brain Gain program in Israel's Innovation Authority. Yes, Israel has an Innovation Authority. She received her BA in social work from Bar Ilan University and her MA in public policy from Tel Aviv. And so please.
Thank you. So first of all, I also want to say thank you so much for hosting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm often in conferences in Europe and don't often get to come back to the United States where I grew up. So it's a real pleasure. Before I explain a bit about my work, I want to put it in the context of Tel Aviv. So we've heard a lot about the Israeli innovation ecosystem. In Tel Aviv, we like to annex that as our own and claim it as the Tel Aviv startup ecosystem, but the truth is the concentration of that ecosystem really is in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And I work for the city of Tel Aviv, for the municipality of Tel Aviv. Specifically, I work for something called Tel Aviv Global, which is the part of the municipality that's creating the global and international relationships between Tel Aviv and other cities. We work on the branding of the city, we work on the tourism, the communications, and the international economic development. And I mention this because Tel Aviv has taken this brand of the startup nation and sort of taken it as its own. And that's, to put it into context, you heard a lot of numbers today. Earlier, Eran, Carmel talked about the amount of startups per capita in Israel, 1 out of every 1,400. In Tel Aviv, that's 1 out of every 290 residents. It's the highest startups per capita in the world. So if you throw a stone in Tel Aviv, you're probably hitting a startup entrepreneur. In all of Israel, you have around 5,800 startups. In the general metropolitan area of Tel Aviv, 3,700 of them. So the concentration of this startup ecosystem that we're talking about really exists in Tel Aviv. Another thing we have, and this has also been mentioned, are the R&D centers from all these huge companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, Coca-Cola. And just to put this in perspective, I go to conferences in Berlin and Amsterdam, and they're honestly quite jealous. They can't dream of the numbers of R&D centers we have when we're a 52 square kilometer city and they are these huge cities. So the startup ecosystem in Tel Aviv is booming. And it's become a brand for the city. So why did the city decide to open a platform, which is the center that I direct? It's an entrepreneurship and innovation center in the south of the city. And the reason is because aside from that beautiful, lovely story that I just told you, you heard this morning from Iran and yesterday from Dr. Flug, who I just checked with this morning on the numbers. The amount of people participating in this economy, in this innovation economy, is 9%. In Tel Aviv, it might be about 14%. That leaves everyone else. What's going on with everyone else? And we talked about the inequality, we talked about the disparity, but you can see it very, very clearly. By raise of hands, how many people have ever been to the central bus station in Tel Aviv? Okay, you may have noticed, great, that's most of the people here, you may have noticed the area looking a bit different than Rothschild Boulevard, which is this lovely boulevard where you have all the startups. Some people have described it as third world. People ask, are we in Tel Aviv anymore? This is an area of the city that is just a microcosm of all the urban social challenges. Where we built the platform is in the old central bus station. You see all the problems around us. Just to give you a bit of numbers, if we're talking about per capita, the neighborhood of Neve Sha'anan should house about 6,000 people, and it's housing about 30,000. The waves of migration from Africa, asylum seekers from Sudan and Eritrea have all landed in this area. You have incredible amounts of poverty, homelessness, drug use, prostitution, and we don't always like to talk about these things, but these are the sides of society that are pushed to the side. But specifically when I just told you about this amazing ecosystem of Tel Aviv, the disparity is so stark that it screams to be addressed. And so the city, a while back, started a process where they started thinking strategically about how can we make life better in this area of the city. And one of the things that they thought to do was to create an entrepreneurship and innovation center, specifically because it's what we do best as a country and as a city. We do innovation well. This is what we know how to do. And the idea was to harness this know-how and this type of thinking to solve local challenges, and also to bring the tools of entrepreneurship to local people. So you just mentioned 8,200, and it's been mentioned over and over, these elite units in the Army that produce most of the startups. Just an anecdote, recently we were interviewing for a few programs, for a few accelerator programs and programs that the city are running, and I interviewed in about a week, I think 70 startups. The amount of people that were Ashkenazi men who had served in the 8,200 unit were just astounding. And so you see that this is a closed group, okay? So the questions that we're asking at the platform is who's participating in this economy and who's benefiting from it? What are we producing? So that's what we're trying to answer at the platform. We're trying to bridge some of those gaps of who's participating, who can participate, who has the skills to participate, who has the education to participate, who has the language to participate, as well as what problems are we solving. Are we only solving cyber, or are we going to solve actual challenges? So I know I've spoken a lot, but I'll just briefly say what we actually do. So we have a hub. It's an entrepreneurship center, a physical space where we offer courses and classes and capacity building to local people to teach the tools of Startup Nation, of entrepreneurship, to take the language and the skills. We have a local accelerator program for local entrepreneurs that come from those areas. And we also are working on defining some of the urban challenges and putting out to the innovative world a call for proposals to help solve those challenges together with the city.
Could you give us an example?
Can I give you an example? Well, what we're working on right now is the challenge of homelessness. And what we're doing is defining more deeply what are the sources of the problem and what the city officials working on this problem challenged with. And then we're going to throw it out to the innovative sector and say if anyone has ideas of solutions, of thinking about it differently.
Like what in your mind's eye and just in this intimate company here?
Yeah, intimate company, yeah.
What would be what's the kind of solution to an issue like homelessness that the tech innovation community could provide?
So first of all, I'll say not the tech innovation, because innovation does not mean technology. Technology is just a tool, and often is not the tool to solve real social issues. And I'll say another thing, this is where the question, which I think is an interesting question for for this panel is, can innovation or startups solve social issues? Certain issues clearly need to be solved by better policy. There are issues that are very deeply rooted. That being said, there's often places where you can shift the needle, or you can give services in a better way. For instance, technology can help you with data, knowing where people are, knowing what's going on with them. Technology can, or not technology, different ways of, this morning's definition of innovation is something that's useful and new. So it's thinking about resources that exist, like empty warehouses that can be repurposed into housing.
That's interesting.
So we have one group that's working on creating an arts program for people. So these are social enterprises, but it's about just thinking about the resources that exist and redesigning maybe some of the services.
So on a personal point, I was one of the founders, and I'm still very involved with an NGO in Jerusalem that sort of tries to rebuild civic society and community activism. And part of what we've been doing is rethinking civic space and also rethinking time. Like, what does Friday afternoon mean to people? What is Shabbat day?
Again, I don't think that the innovative sector will solve all the problems, but it's about injecting the municipal work with more innovative thinking and with newer thinking.
Great, thank you so much. So, Ohad, back on the spot. So you heard a bit about Ohad earlier. I could just say that one of the reasons that's wonderful is further illustration of something that I say all the time, but it's true, that one of the best things about Brandeis is the students. Often when I'm sitting and chatting with students, I ask myself, gee, they're actually paying me for this. So Ohad, we heard in broad strokes earlier about what you do, but could you please tell us more, day in, day out, what your work looks like, and what are some of the challenges you?
Sure. At OGS, the idea is, when I started thinking about OGS, I was looking at the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the challenges, the opportunities, and what could be our marginal contribution here at Brandeis, here in Boston. And I realized that we have to narrow down the pool. There are 13 million people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and we can't bring all of them to Brandeis. The idea is, who can we bring that will have an impact and when they will have the impact? So the first cut of this very big pool is to think about people that are young professionals in the late 20s. The average age at OGS is 28. I myself am 29. I felt that my age group, my generation, is traditionally have been neglected in the effort of bringing Israelis and Palestinians together. It is way easier to focus on high school students because they can reach them easily, or on established business people who already have defined for themselves what their values and participation in such program are going to be. That said, I think that my age group has a great opportunity in it because we are old enough to have demonstrated leadership and young enough to dedicate our lives to something that we believe in. So I realize if we can find people my age, this will be a worthy challenge. The second thing, and then I'm going to move to answer the question directly, but just to give context, once we find the people that we believe are going to be the future leaders of the region, the question we ask ourselves is, how do we bring them together so they can build trust with each other? Barry Schraeg is in the audience here. He was a partner to me in my early day conversations about what are the different vehicles for people to trust each other when you think about Israelis and Palestinians. And entrepreneurship was an answer because we took a bet and said, if Israelis and Palestinians my age will build a company together, it may or may not be successful, but they will learn that if they rely on each other, there might be a great outcome for everyone, and that for us was a very important lesson. So with these two principles in mind, we said, over the course of the next 10, 15 years, if we created a grassroots movement of the best and the brightest in the region, and we made sure that they learn how to trust each other, and we maintain the relationships, then we have a not too small shot that they will be organized around causes that we care about, mostly right now the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, obviously, even though the opportunities today to make an impact are more limited than there will be in a few years, I think. And this group of people will be on the front lines of any effort to bring the communities, the whole communities together. So how do we translate this into action? Every year we recruit candidates who come from all throughout Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. In fact, it is interesting to sit here with Jake and with Shana because some of our companies have hosted MIT students in the past, and one of the partners of Shana in the municipality is going to be an OGS fellow this summer. How do we basically find our people? We ask for candidates with the highest evidence of leadership that someone at the age of 27, 28 can generate. So we would go and take people who just finished their internship in the Supreme Court of Israel after law school, or a Palestinian woman who finished her master's at Oxford at the age of 23, or an Israeli person who built a startup and sold it. We'll look for the people with the best credentials. Then we will have a series of interviews and evaluation to make sure that they will be able to work together. And once we finalize our cohort, this year between 30 to 32 people, depending on how many visas we will be able to secure, we'll bring them all to Brandeis. They come here for 3 months. For 10 weeks, they will be living here on this campus. And in the remaining of the time, they will be moving to South Boston because the housing will be used for the incoming class of undergraduates. In those 3 months, we have a great opportunity to both deliver as much value as we can, but more importantly for us, to create the 2 outcomes of OGS, which is 1, the leadership group, so the cohort of leaders with the same values, and 2, the companies, the ventures, we call them. So what does it mean? A person will come to, I'll give you an example just to go through the life cycle of one of our companies. If anyone was at APAC this year, they saw on the main stage a Bedouin medical doctor. Her name is Yasmin Abu Fraicha. She presented her company, Genesis. So Yasmin was in the first class of OGS in 2016. And she said to her friends when she was selected, I'm passionate about solving genetic diseases in the Bedouin community, because a Bedouin kid is 10 times more likely to be born with a severe genetic disease than a Jewish kid, and that's what my passion is. Palestinian members of our cohort were also passionate about it, not only because there are half a million Bedouins in the West Bank, but also because for some of them it hit really close to heart, and their families have dealt with similar problems. So very quickly throughout the summer, maybe already in the 2nd or 3rd week, we now have a small group of 4 or 5 people, Israeli and Palestinian, who are interested in solving the problem of genetic diseases in the Bedouin community, have the skill set. One was a medical doctor, the other one was in the healthcare world, and etc. And then our goal here at Brandeis is to give them the resources. So what we will do is we will have them go through a top-notch academic program where we will teach them how to build a business plan, how to raise money, how to pitch, all the basic classes that entrepreneurs need. And then we will match them with leaders in the community here. This is where communities such as CJP and others have been amazingly helpful, because we will be able, if it's a company in the world of healthcare, we'll be able to match them with entrepreneurs who built a $3 billion healthcare company here in Kendall Square, and etc. So we will have those connections we create. The companies that are being formed throughout the summer will go through an evolution where they present their business plan, get feedback, and eventually they will, at the end of the summer, introduce their final plan. We will evaluate which one of those companies we have great confidence in, and we will support them financially. Not in very small way. Over the past years, we have already supported companies at the scope of $1 million, and we now have another fund. And that's before what our community is doing for those companies, which is in the scope of $1.2 million right now. So we will look at the companies that we have confidence in, we will seed them, and we will help them move forward. So for example, this Bedouin venture from 2016, today already tested over 1,000 Bedouins, who, thanks to its tests, know now whether they have a good match or not a good match before they get married. I wouldn't say before they decide, because many times the decision is in the hands of the family or of the fathers specifically, but at least now before they get married, just like in the ultra-Orthodox community in the US in the 80s and 90s, there is the chance to go and say, this is my genetic information.
So like the way people did with Tay-Sachs disease.
Yes.
Or do
Yes.
Tay-Sachs.
And then we built over the years around 12 of those companies. Some of them have gotten to be more successful than others, but some of them have done terrific things. I'm sure we're going to talk about it now.
If I could ask you one question about the group dynamics. So, I mean, part of what sounds interesting here is, you know, anybody who's ever worked in intergroup relations knows that one of the least productive ways to deal with fraught intergroup relations is to bring people together and say, okay, now why don't you all talk about the things that you all disagree about, rather than let's come together to work on a project, which is what you're doing. And at the same time, presumably political issues come up because you're talking about a very intensive group process here. I'd assume you've given some thought and have some experience as to how to deal with those.
To answer this properly, I will need at least 3 minutes. Okay.
I don't think anyone in the audience will begrudge you.
So obviously this is really at the core of OGS, how we bring people together and build this mindset where people think about the program and about our fellowship as an opportunity and not as a place to vent and bring all the difficulties that we try to get away from for a couple of months. So how do we do it? Firstly, it's really important to create co-ownership of the program between Israelis and Palestinians. It means I worked very hard personally in the first years to get donations from Israeli and Palestinian business people and to recruit some of the most influential Israeli and Palestinian families in the world to be on our board of advisors. That gave a lot of the Palestinian candidates the understanding that they will be treated here at Brandeis as equals. As an Israeli, it's a bit easier to come here and feel comfortable. No need to explain why. For a Palestinian person, the question would be, am I going to be subject to a certain approach, perspective, doctrine, which I will need to cooperate with? And if yes, what would it be? We worked very hard to explain that not only it's going to be extremely objective, there is co-ownership. And if at some point I, as executive director, don't do a good enough of a job, or any of our 11 staff members, we will be either condemned by our Palestinian board members or by our Israeli board members, and that will give everyone the sense of where we are and who really dictates what we're doing here. In all of our years, we raised over $10 million from over 100 donors. No one ever called and say, I want you to do this or that, and the fellows appreciate it. So that's number one, is about ownership of the program. Number two is about values. We, very early on in the recruitment cycle, we say to our fellows, here is the OGS way of doing things. One, we don't pretend that there is no conflict. So no one needs to come here and feel as if we are normalizing or pretending that everything is good in the region, because we're not. On the other hand, we also don't say that this program here is a place for us to discuss all the difficulties that are in the region and our narratives in a way to create a shared vision. That's also very complicated. We have a vision when it comes to what we want our communities to look like and what will be our contribution as alumni of the program. But we don't have a political answer such as we support the two-state solution or the one-state solution, and we also understand it's very hard right now to create a coalition. So what we say to our people is that you will need to commit to our values. And the values are about the empathy and sympathy to other people's narrative. It's about understanding and recognizing that we don't know much about what the other side is experiencing and listening to it. And also to me as an Israeli, and I say it with, again, this is within my own perspective, not the organizational perspective, but I would come and say, I also don't think this conflict is very fair. So I would say to the Palestinians on the first day, I don't think that Israelis and Palestinians are suffering from this conflict to the same extent. I personally believe, and we could look at the data if we want, that it's harder to be a Palestinian in this conflict than an Israeli. But I also don't think that OGS is supposed to be the place where we understand why and how to fix it. What we're basically saying is, I want each one of our fellows, and I tell them this every summer, to be productive about whatever is going on here. And it means that if you're a Palestinian from the West Bank and yesterday the military was in your town and you are feeling very distressed about it and you share this with the group, I will be the first one to say, please share it. And I will not be telling an Israeli fellow how to react, but I'll be very disappointed and worried if the reaction did not include sympathy or empathy. Same thing with Israelis that were here in the summer of 2017 when we had this bombing attack in Tel Aviv, the terror attack in Tel Aviv with the 4 Israelis who died in the coffee shop, and they had an honest discussion with their friends. I didn't feel like enough of you came to me and said, I'm sorry that this happened in your neighborhood, even though you know I'm here. I live right near to this place. So the second thing is to say what our values mean. And they don't mean at OGS that we're going to have to agree on a political landscape and approach. It means that we have to agree about the way we treat each other. And that, in fact, there are a lot of things about this conflict that are extremely humiliating, uncomfortable, scary to people in a region. Micha Goodman says that Israel is always feel unsafe, Palestinians always feel humiliated. That's part of the theme of his latest book. That's one approach that I really feel also with our fellows. And the way we deal with it at OGS is that we say to people, here is what OGS is going to do. That leads me to the third part. Dan Terris used to be the head of the Ethics Center at Brandeis, one of the smartest people I've met in this university. And he built for us a facilitation program where every week or every second week, the staff really leaves the office area, and our alumni, our fellows, are coming together to speak about whatever is on their mind. This is the place where they really open up the most critical and sensitive topics. We found historically that classes, we had 3 classes so far, so we found that the 2 classes that had very intense facilitation created stronger relationships. And with the 1 class when we said these sessions are not mandatory, the relationships were less substantial. And it's because people really need to talk about the hard, difficult, embarrassing, humiliating parts of our narrative as people and of this conflict to really believe that they can be equal with the other side. It's important, I don't want to speak on behalf of Palestinians, but it's important in many ways to the populations at OGS that feel that by virtue of participating in such a program, some people in their communities believe that they compromise their own narrative. And our people have to come and admit to themselves first that the way forward includes working with the other side. But then my job as executive director is to create space for our participants to say, you know what, I do want to tell you that it bothers me that here in Boston, here at Brandeis, we are equal, but when we go back to the region, I don't feel equal to you. And they need to have those conversations, and we give them room for them.
Very interesting. So, Jacob, I'm curious. In the programs that you run, do the political issues come up? Are they bracketed out? Do they come up between the lines? Or do you let them, when they come up, let them come up organically as people get to know each other? Or?
So first, I'm very happy that we work with you. And I'm happy to work more closely together. I think business, the way we view it is we want business to be a force for good and through economic development that is not just to one group, that benefits one group, as you mentioned, but that is more broad is important. So these issues do come up, but as I mentioned, truthfully, the students in our program, in the course, are not necessarily aware of the conflict. They see it on the news, but most of the students come from Asia. They don't really understand how deep it runs. So we don't go too far into it. We focus more on the business issues.
In curricular terms, do you give them any sort of overview survey? Though in Israel's case, it's probably an overview. Of Israeli society, politics.
So we do. We have 2 sessions in that. One is about Jewish history, which goes back, we have a professor, Professor Peter Krause from Boston College, who comes and does 2,000 years of history in 90 minutes. And he does a good job. And then he comes back for a second session to talk mostly about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But beyond that, the issues don't really come up. Most of the students in our programs are interested in understanding how to think about the technology, how to think about the innovation, see startups, and understand kind of what is the newest, latest technology that's going to make a difference.
And Shana, the work that you do is very much about conflict, but a different set of them, right? Conflicts within Israeli society and ethnic. And so I'm just curious to see how you see your work in that frame.
I think that to a lot of people in the world, Israel is viewed specifically through this prism of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and not a lot of people know about kind of the internal conflicts and difficulties. I think that came up a lot yesterday with Dr. Fluke's talk about the disparity and the inequality and all sorts of different things that are going on under the surface. So you either know about Israel, the conflict, or the innovation, the tech center, but again, that's 10% of the population. There's a lot of other things going on. I joke sometimes, and this is not true, but I joke sometimes that some of the conflicts in the area that I work in are more intense than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's obviously not true, but it's, there are some really deep issues that relate to ethnicity. First of all, to race, to class.
And the motif of humiliation.
Yeah, yes, indeed. So, for instance, we have the issues of asylum seekers and refugees from Africa, and what is their place in Israeli society?
Do they participate in your programs?
Some of them do, and we're working hard to bring more people in, which is a very complicated issue, because when I first came into this position, it was very taboo, and it's so politically tense, this issue, because local Israelis that have been there for generations, many feel a lot of tension and a lot of conflict towards those people for various different reasons. These are people that have been marginalized themselves and felt deep inequality, and then all of a sudden these waves of migration came in and overcrowded their areas. All these NGOs came in and started helping the asylum seekers, and then that created tension. There's a lot of political issues around it, politicians speaking about these people. But then there's, and that's very documented in the news and talked about, the pro and anti infiltrators or asylum seekers, as we call it, very similar to the rhetoric here in the United States surrounding immigration. But what other issues that people don't see are the issues of gentrification, where you have marginalized populations that have been poor for a really long time, and then you have the new, first the artists, then the students, and then the big high-rise buildings coming in and people feeling that they're being pushed out. There's Ashkenazi, Mizrahi tensions. So you kind of have people that are at kind of the bottom edges of society. When I talk about the homeless people, the reason I focus on that is because it's actually, there is quite a safety net in Israel in terms of the social welfare policy. So to get to that point, you have to kind of be really in a bad way. I would say that, to put it lightly. So we have all of these issues just surrounding. I often view my building. The building is like this narrow white building, the old Central Bus Station, and around it is a sea. It's like a little boat, and around it is a sea of societal issues that are at the core of some of the societal issues that Israel is dealing with, which unfortunately don't make the rhetoric in terms of elections. Nobody's talking about that. We all talk about the conflict, but there's internal issues. And it's difficult to create, similar to what Ohad was talking about, when we created our accelerator program, we were thinking about how are we going to bring different elements of the society into one group. We wanted it to be heterogeneous and diverse, but are they going to all be able to sit together as a group? And almost similar to bringing, if we have an asylum seeker with,
a local resident,
how is that going to work?
Right.
But I do think that our focus on entrepreneurship and say, hey, let's focus on the projects that we're doing. Let's not focus on the conflict between us. Let's advance your project, kind of releases the tension a little bit and then allows people to work together.
Have you or you, Ohad, ever thought about taking the model of your work and replicating it elsewhere? Do NGOs or other folks in other countries ever poke in and say, gee, look, maybe you could teach us how to
Personally,
do
I
this?
first want to make it work. I'm still working on making it
Right.
work before
That'd be nice.
replicating. But on our end, we have, because I work for Tel Aviv Global, we have hundreds of delegations from other cities coming through all the time.
Wow.
Usually to hear about how Tel Aviv is this startup center, but then I throw this at them,
And do
there's
they have
some
things?
interesting
Do they have
discussions.
things that are instructive for you? They say, gee, well, this is what we tried in.
Absolutely. Part of my work is the global collaboration, which is why I'm in Europe a lot. These aren't unique these issues are not unique to Tel Aviv or to Israel. They exist in all major cities in the world, and there's a lot of collaboration and tons of learning that I get. Here in Boston, a few days ago, I sat with the head of new urban mechanics at the Boston City Hall to learn about what they're doing in similar ways. There's a lot of learning going on between cities.
So I'd like to, Ohad, do you have anything you want to add about looking outward, other countries, other places, other conflict zones?
We at OGS are dedicated to our very special to our own special conflict. We are approached by
A conflict of one's own. Virginia
we are approached by other institutions thinking about India, Pakistan. We had some conversations. We will not be doing it ourselves. I think now, when we have some more track record and we see some of the companies move on to great milestones, we are pleased to share it with others. But still at OGS, there is also the notion of when we are successful, we're not really talking about it because it might compromise the safety of some of our participants, especially in Gaza. We built the largest startup in Gaza. Recently, last week was the first example in all of our existence where the fact that we had an Israeli operation alongside a Palestinian operation under the same company did not just work out, it actually made the Gaza company win a tender, and a significant one, because they were able to get some merchandise from China that other companies in Gaza could not get without the Israeli connection that we have that helped it happen. So that was very significant for us, but I think it needs to be first, I want to share a few case studies where it works dramatically before we can inspire other people to just go full in.
A question I can't help asking about the demographics of your group. So you say Palestinians, do settlers also participate? Because there are plenty, I mean, look where Naftali Bennett came from in his business life, and a lot of settlers I know in the territory are big in
Well, Bennett himself wrote
I know. Yeah, please. No.
He wrote a recommendation letter last year for his spokesperson to apply for the program, one of his team. And it was surprising to see the letter addressed to our selection committee. We will not rule out someone based on where they live geographically. One of our participants, her family was among the founders of Efrat. We will rule out a person, Israeli or Palestinian, if we feel that they are not aligned with our values. The way we look at it is that we say, politically the spectrum is quite wide, meaning that if an Israeli is voting for Likud or Meretz or Balad will not make a huge difference for us. And if a Palestinian was involved during their college years with student groups that are not just the PLO but also others, as long as it wasn't in a military setting, we will also not rule people out right away off the get-go. Where we will rule people out is specifically when we interview someone who lives in a settlement, and I would say something like in the interview, so what is your vision about the 2.5 to 3 million Palestinians who live in the West Bank? And they say, nonsense, there are only 300,000 of them. That might create for us significant problems later on, so we will have to ask the person and we'll challenge them and we'll say, you'll have to listen to some narratives you're not going to like. Some people on their own say, this is not for me. In very special cases where we feel like the person will not give space to other people, we will rule them out. But we don't know, I really don't know what our people vote to or where they are politically. it was hard when we started. Palestinians wanted a two-state solution, so I thought it was a good indication. Everyone would think the two-state solution is a good way forward, might indicate they might be good for OGS. Today, you can have a class of Palestinians and none of them will want the two-state solution, or maybe only one of them. So it's very hard today to know where people stand.
Right.
But we have equal number of, the way we represent the population in a way that it's pretty much equal number of Arabs and Jews, and the Arab population will be divided. A few of them will be citizens of Israel, and the rest will not be.
Right.
So, for example, this summer, 30 people will have 14 Jewish Israelis and 16 non-Jews, out of which
Some.
some Gaza, some West Bank, and some citizens of Israel.
So I just have sort of like one large question, then our quick lightning round, and then we'll turn it to the audience. Large question. And it may be nonsensical, but as I also as an American Israeli and lived in Israel for a very long time, over the years I used to wonder if sort of the Israeli genius for improvisation, for moving quickly, there's that on the one hand, and then on the other, Israel's society is not really known for its planning. And is there a relationship between the two? Because I used to wonder, does the genius for improvisation come at the cost of, what in the States would seem to be not that America is a model of orderly planning these days, but generally in America, at least for a long time, there was this ethos of reasonably ordered planning process. Is there some sort of trade-off there? I guess because it's something that it seemed to strike me time and again. I don't know. And again, it could be nonsense on my part. Any of you ever thought about that, or is this just things that...
Well, I think my first thought was just related to what, again, quoting Dr. Flug, I really enjoyed her talk yesterday about long-term planning in terms of government and policy. So, I think this is something that exists in politics everywhere, but specifically in Israel, there's this startup mode of every aspect of Israeli life, which is very fast and very
because when it works,
long-term planning.
Because when it works, it's remarkable.
When it works, it's remarkable, but to create deep societal change and progress, I think you do need long-term policy and programming. So on a political level, I think it's not great.
Yeah, and also one wonders if the allure of the startup thing. Anyway,
that's
just
one thought.
a very quick lightning round with just one question, then we open it to the audience, and a simple-minded question perhaps. But I'm just curious, the projects that you're all involved in recent years, what surprised you the most once you got into it? What did you think you would find, and then you found something very different? What was the thing that maybe upended your expectations about something? Whoever would like to start first? Please?
I'm happy to say a word. So maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised, but the willingness of companies to work with our students has really been quite amazing. So the first year it took a while to get to know the companies and to source companies, but truthfully by now we work with every venture capital firm, whether it's American, Israeli, ones from Asia and Europe, and they're all eager to really engage. So it really changed from the first year, which was a little more difficult, to now, where it's quite easy to identify companies, source companies, attract students because of certain technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or cybersecurity or cryptocurrency. So just the pace of connection, which
Well, it's interesting because we tend to think that we're living in an historical moment when globalization is being pushed back by populism, et cetera, and maybe not across the board is also what I'm hearing. It's really not across the board.
Quite nice. That surprised me.
Interesting.
I think that I was surprised at how limited and scared the young generation is when it comes to their ability to change their societies and to change the norms of where they come from. And I talk about both Israelis and Palestinians that really had to be convinced that really there is even a chance to replace leadership that over the course of their lifetimes have been nothing but disappointment. I think about American students who played a huge role in ending the Vietnam War. I think about the movement, the social movement we saw in the U.S. recently the Me Too movement, movement that speak to the rights of minorities. And I think that when I look at Israel and the Palestinian territories, unfortunately, there is less of a sense for the younger generation that if they organize around causes they believe in, they could make a real difference. Some of them feel like the cards have been handed, things have been decided at the high level of government. I think we see it in the Israeli election cycle right now, whether there's going to be a surprise in the next week or not. Still, if you go and ask young Israelis, many of them will tell you that, you know, it's been decided, it's very hard. I mean, some will say, I'm going to get and fight for what is important to me. But I don't see the same zeal in the eyes of the young generation in our region that I see when I speak to students here, which bothers me, especially when we romanticize the Israeli young person as the innovative go-getter who can get whatever. So far, I think when we look at the success of the state of Israel, it's phenomenal, but the ability of young people in Israel to really create a future for themselves where it's based on the principles they believe in have not yet been proven and have been proven in the US a couple of times throughout history, in my opinion.
Very interesting.
So I would say one positive surprise and one more negative surprise. The positive surprise was the willingness of other cities to collaborate and the amount, what I was
talking... Other cities in Israel?
No, other cities globally. To collaborate with Tel Aviv and the similarities between cities and the challenges. And I found colleagues in every European city that I've been to in the United States that are dealing with similar issues, are passionate about similar issues, and a bit of hope because cities are becoming a different player on the global scale. According to the UN Habitat, by 2050, 70% of the UN population will live in cities. So municipal governments are going to start playing a very different role. So if we talk about our frustrations with national politics, cities are going to be able to have a huge impact, and they're realizing this. And even the UN's attitudes are changing, and in the EU to focus more on cities and funding things in cities and using those to create, to reach their goals. So that's been a very positive surprise that this vehicle called city government and city innovation might actually be able to have a big impact on people's lives. That's a positive. The negative is, and I knew this, it wasn't exactly a surprise, but the gaps. So if we talk about, you know, artificial intelligence and amazing, you know, technology, and then I'm sitting with people that live 500 meters from Rothschild and don't know how to open Facebook or don't know how to use Excel or have like very, very basic, like a technology gap. And I'll just end off with this story that I think is, this anecdote that I think is very telling and sticks with me to this day, which is that we brought in a speaker to speak about investments and getting funding for your business ideas and your startup ideas. And one of the women who lived locally in Neve Sha'anan came up to me afterwards and she's like, sounds really amazing. Like, what if I pitch my idea and I get this investment, but if it fails and I have to return all that money, oh my God, how will I do that? And it really clicked for me in that moment, the difference between people who have access to investments versus the people whose lives are surrounding loans. And I told her, you're thinking of a loan because that's the world she lives in, where in order to start a small business, you get a small business loan with high interest that you'll have to pay back versus the very privileged technology entrepreneurs that will get a few $1 million and oops, it didn't work out. Oh well, there goes $1 million. Nobody cares, nobody bats an eyelash, whereas this person's reality is very different. And I think that is of a story that, to me, encapsulates some of this disparity that we have to work on.
So also, as you're talking, I can't help but mention the great man for whom this university was named said that states were the laboratories of democracy. So it seems you're quite literally created a lab, and you too are creating laboratories of democracy and all kinds of things. Now, at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience. I'm sure you must have questions. Anna's walking around with microphone, and Wendy has microphone. So we have microphones on either side. Any? So please. And Nader, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Nader Habibi. I'm with Brandeis, Crown Center for Middle East Studies. And I'd like to address my question to Professor Cohen. You yourself said that there are some unique conditions in Israel that have made this a startup story a success. When you take these students from other businesses, especially more mature ones, do they realize that the conditions in Israel might not be similar to conditions in places where they are going to engage in entrepreneurship? And what do you teach them about what is the best thing to learn from experience of Israel despite these differences? And if others like to contribute, I would appreciate that.
Sure. So I think truthfully, when the students start out in the course, they think that learning will be identifying those essential ingredients in order to be able to replicate. And perhaps the frustration for some of them, and some of them come from places like Singapore, and they come from the government, they work in China, they work, as I said, in countries around the world, they, at the end of the course, come to the realization that perhaps it's really quite unique, and it's not that easy to replicate. For example, in Singapore, which is an amazing hub, innovation hub, but somewhat different from Israel. They have similarities. They too have mandatory military service. But one thing that is very different is the hierarchy in a society versus what they find out in Israel and what they discover in Israel. And that even in the military, people will question the orders, depending on the unit, of course, but they will not necessarily follow the orders as dictated. You talked about improvising and being able to be adaptable. And whether it starts early on, places like the military, to get the mission done but adapt to the versus in places that are very hierarchical, like Singapore or like China, where you follow the way you were told. You don't deviate from it. So it's tough for them to replicate because of certain cultural, social characteristics that are different than in Israel. So again, they start, I think, with a desire to learn what those are. And by the time that we end and we list them on the board, after their experience, they see that it really is quite unique. Yeah.
So then what can they take away?
They take away the lesson of the course of what makes Israel unique innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's really the objective of the course, to decipher and decode what makes Israel a startup nation, not necessarily to give you the ingredients to be able to replicate it, but to understand what makes that country different. So that's what they learn.
Thank you. Other questions from Professor Sarn?
So our session was really entitled. Our session was really entitled "The Future of Innovation."
There's that.
In Israel, I think it was Yogi Berra who's supposed to have said prophecy is very difficult, especially about the future. But nevertheless, you are all thinking ahead, and we've heard different scenarios last night, this morning, about what will happen. Many of you know, in the 1980s, we talked about Japan. There were all sorts of prophecies about Japan, and none of that turned out to be correct. What do you think about the future from your vantage point?
Who wants to take a stab at the future?
Well, I'll say that I do, it was mentioned yesterday, I think there is an effort to bring in different sectors of society into the innovation ecosystem. So we talked about the ultra-Orthodox and Arab Israelis. So I think that is gonna change, I think, for the better, and getting more people involved. And I think, and this is something that the Innovation Authority I know is thinking about a lot, is they're trying to think about how they can infuse other sectors with innovation. So I think that there is the understanding that we can't keep it in this bubble, and I think it's going to start hopefully expanding to other sectors, other industries, and bringing those up as well, I hope.
When does it all hit a wall? Is there such a thing?
Our bubbles.
No, I mean, just curious, like, does this go on forever, you know, or does this, or are the engines of the innovation ecosystem, are there things that you could see, a few changes here, a few changes there, and things go, right? I mean, Israel's known periods when certain kinds of economic activity, which were fueled by, you know, sort of there was an era when, say, collective planning, I mean, when there was an era in Israel's history when centralized planning seemed like a really good idea, and it got, you know, very impressive results and so on, and then eventually petered out. So does the innovation ethos, again, yeah, you can't really, predicting the future. The only thing, as historians, the only thing we can predict is the past. and then, even then, could you imagine something that stalls the Israeli innovation now seems like a juggernaut?
I think from my vantage point, I think the future is bright around innovation. We talk about key stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem, and it's the entrepreneurs. And truthfully, nothing brings in more entrepreneurs than the success they see every day. Every day they open up the papers and they hear of McDonald's buying a company just last week. They hear about startups exiting for huge multiples. And I think they're attracted to that. I think they want to be successful. Mm-hmm. So more entrepreneurs are being bit by this bug of being innovation, startup nation. They come from the military, where they've been trained extremely well, especially in those units I mentioned. They've had leadership opportunities. The government, which plays a key role in this, whether it's national government or local government, is looking to further this innovation, entrepreneurial ecosystem. The universities play a critical role in this, the 7 universities, in all the work that they're doing. More and more students are going into entrepreneurial programs. They're launching accelerators. They are putting a spotlight on innovation, on entrepreneurship. You have more venture capital firms every year going into that country, driving up the success. More startups are launched. The entrepreneurs that come from the universities, that come from the military, are being greeted by venture capitalists that are, again, whether Israeli, whether they are American, European, from Brazil, from everywhere. And again, it's a closed circle. Mm-hmm. And it creates this, what I refer to as innovation friction. And it's in a tiny petri dish country, right, where everyone knows everyone. Right. They know them because they live next to them. They know them because they served with them. They know them because they studied with them at the Technion or Weizmann Institute or in Be'er Sheva. It doesn't really matter. So they hear and they continuously engage with innovation. And I think nothing attracts more people into it than just the success that they see daily.
And a legal system that sustains this in some way.
Yeah, so it requires institutions.
Right.
So there are stakeholders.
Wouldn't you just, I'd be very curious to hear, what are sort of the government or legal institutions that are necessary
the
To
rule of
sustain
law,
this, the rule of law, avoiding
the
kleptocracy.
intellectual property, the court system that you mentioned, the support from government. So there are all these institutions that provide the foundation for the stakeholders. The stakeholders that we look at are, again, whether it's the entrepreneur, whether it's the universities, whether it's the military, the venture capital, and as was mentioned, the multinational corporations. Every year, more and more go there. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, you mentioned Coca-Cola. Every year more. Companies you would never think about. Caterpillar, companies that are ones that just want to understand the technology. And they're there because the entrepreneurs are there. The entrepreneurs are there because the venture capital firms are there. The venture capital firms are there because of all these people that come out of the military and the universities and launch companies. So it creates this virtuous circle of innovation. And that really is unique. And then you put it in a small, tiny country where everyone knows everyone. 3 days ago, being in Beijing, that city is huge. Over 20 million people. Just to get from one side to the other takes hours. Versus in Israel, they are right there. And they're there in Tel Aviv. And, to some extent, it's a shame because we want it to be Medinat Israel, lo Medinat Tel Aviv. But from an entrepreneurship standpoint, it is all there. They're across the street. So that creates the friction that I only see now in Kendall Square. If you go visit Kendall Square, it is unbelievable what's happening there in terms of biotech.
See, what's so interesting here is that so much we're talking about are these technologies that are about spanning distances and remote things and Facebook connecting billions of people, and yet at the heart of it, you're saying, are face-to-face relationships.
You need the face-to-face. You need the friction of the same people who know each other.
Please.
At the risk of coming off as provocative, I will say that I have a few different thoughts. I grew up in Ashdod, a city of close to 300,000 people. None of my friends work at the R&D center of Coca-Cola. None of my friends work at the R&D center of Microsoft. I am not well equipped to talk about macro-level innovation in Israel. What I am equipped to talk about is three things. One, I came from a meaningful military service. I was an officer in the Special Forces. Two, on top of OGS, I started a tech company that has offices in San Francisco, Boston, and Beersheba, and East Jerusalem. And three, I've worked at OGS with a lot of Israel's best and brightest. And I think this gives me a little bit of an insight about what innovation in Israel means to a 29-year-old Sephardic Israeli from Ashdod, what it means to a 26-year-old ultra-Orthodox from Jerusalem, and what it means for a 25-year-old Arab woman from the Galilee. And I think that one of the risks in looking at Israel as a startup nation is that we forget that this prosperity not always, and in fact in most cases, doesn't come down to enhance the day-to-day life of the citizens of Israel. Mellanox was sold for $6.7 billion 2 weeks ago. The employees of Mellanox had a ballpark of $300 million divided by the number of employees, getting to 35,000 shekels per employee, the equivalent of $10,000, putting management aside. These employees did not make a killing, and these employees who were dedicating their lives and gave all they had to Mellanox, also maybe in the hopes that the state of Israel would benefit economically, have to be confronted with the fact that when an Israeli giant tech company is selling all of its IP to NVIDIA, it might enhance the situation of the software engineers. It will not enhance the situation of the average Israeli. It will not enhance the situation of the taxes the country collects, and it definitely will not enhance the life of the friend I have in Ashdod right now who has been working in construction, and when he tried to get into the startup nation, he faced many, many, many doors. So when I talk about what the startup nation means to me, I think that I have been privileged to be able to go to Tel Aviv and to Rothschild and to raise money from angel investors and VCs. I think I've been privileged to meet the business community here in Boston and to have some mutual work with them. But to say that this innovation in Israel is changing the face of the nation, I find it hard to believe, again, from my experience. Here is where I would like to see Israeli innovation. I would like Jerusalem to be the first city to figure out how people of all religion can live together peacefully and prosper together. I'd like to see Israel as a place that shows immigrants coming into Israel a new model, a new system where they can live in coexistence with the native citizens of the region. I'd like to see Israel as a place that doesn't enhance innovation to create the best surveillance techniques in the West Bank, but rather to bring people together. And to me, what all of the developments we see in Israel mean is that the very privileged part of Israeli society gets better and stronger, and the least privileged part of Israeli societies don't really get the impact that I can say moves the needle. And this is where I would like to see a lot of our innovation efforts in Israel directed at in the next couple of years.
I'm just nodding vigorously because I really 100% agree. And I think Ohad was talking about who gets to participate in it, but also what are we solving? Are we people of the tech for tech's sake? Or are we people of the book? And when I mean book, I don't mean I actually mean the moral teachings. So I agree. And also, even on not just the moral issues, like are we using innovation to find peace? Are we using innovation to solve social issues? But even on a very basic level, are we using innovation for better infrastructure, for better schools, for better services? How is it affecting inwardly? We're big exporters of innovation. So even to the developing world, we export great solutions that actually solve people's lives. But this is something I often talk about at the platform, and I say to entrepreneurs, wait a second, we don't have to go running around the world. We have enough things to do right here at home. Let's use this kind of thinking and innovation to solve even just infrastructure issues, health issues, education issues, and the dream is also much more deeper societal issues. And I don't see the path going in that direction, unfortunately, but I think we all have to try to work to move it there.
And by the way, I agree as well, that it's really currently a small segment of society that benefits from it. In fact, that's a question. Why is it startup nation? Why not scale-up nation? Which many times our students ask, because they see it being very successful as a startup nation, but failing at scale-up nation. And there are some examples of companies like Amdocs or Teva or Checkpoint, and we can all list the handful, maybe 10 at most. But why isn't it scale-up nation? Why do they sell? And I think there is a failure there of being able to develop the companies to be more successful at providing the returns to not just the founders, not just the ones who sold out to the various multinational companies, but by growing the companies and providing more employment opportunities. So the individuals you mentioned don't just get $10,000 and thank you for playing. And
what would it take, sort of legally, institutionally? What sort of regulatory frameworks or tax incentives or I don't know what?
It's a good question. Truthfully, I'm not sure it's legal or regulatory or tax frameworks. I think the pluses that make Israel startup nation, and that is the personality of the individuals that I mentioned, including not necessarily following orders and being more creative and saying, why are they telling me? I can do it on my own. I can do it differently. That creativity is good at starting up companies. It is not good at scaling up companies. In scale up, it's different. So you need different characteristics, different attributes, different management skills to scale up versus startup. And sometimes the Israeli entrepreneurs don't understand that. They don't want to accept that. They think they can do everything. And I have two cousins, started two companies, reached $50 million, and from $50 million, it ended up at zero. Because they didn't understand that certain skills to scale are different from start.
And so some of that happened to the kibbutzim. They were very successful for several decades.
So it's easy and maybe beneficial to sell to American multinational companies because until that skill set is developed by MBA programs in Israel, and there are more of them coming up.
It's almost like outsourcing.
My dad says it's everyone's a chief and there are no Indians. Right? That's good for perhaps startup. It's scale up, it's not. So you need to change the mindset.
There's a question over there.
Thank you. So I'm part of an educational institution that thinks about opportunities for women in innovation and entrepreneurship, and I'm wondering if each of you could comment on the participation of and opportunities for women in each of your programs.
For what?
Women.
I think you should start.
Specifically in innovation? The numbers in Israel in terms of participation are quite low, specifically in the tech innovation sector. It's about 6% women-led companies, so that's incredibly low. It should change. I think partially it relates back to education, how many are participating, how many are learning engineering. It also relates back to roles in the Army. Like I said, there's this closed group, so you bring on your friends. I do think that there's a growing awareness of this issue, and it's starting to shift, and we are seeing a change. I don't have that much more insights other than to say that it's the more, I'll say, I think something that Aziz said, the more you see role models and you see the successes, the more it will feed in. So there are some great programs. She Codes is an example of an Israeli-run, women-run organization that kind of trains women in coding and trying to get more women into the system. So there are lots of different programs trying to infuse the ecosystem with more women. But I think it does start very early on in how we're speaking to young women and where we're kind of pushing them. But it is changing, and I think the more we see those role models, the more it's gonna change.
At OGS, because most of our companies are not high-tech companies, but rather innovation in different fields, so we have higher participation. In the first year, we had 50% men and women. In the second year, we had probably 45%. Last year, I think it was 40%. And this year, it will also be close to 40%. We could do some work to get it better, but also eventually we look at our pool and we choose the best people from the pool, and then we look into the representation and make sure that none of the population is more represented in a big way than another.
I guess my comment would be also in the US, as you know, the high tech, as was mentioned, is not, doesn't have the representation we would want, which is similar in Israel.
Yeah, I just added, just to put us in the global scale, Dell just did a study on this, and so Tel Aviv ranks, out of 50 major cities, Tel Aviv ranks at like 24. So we're in the middle, which is, when I saw that, I was like, oy, what's going on in the rest of the world? So we're kind of in the middle there, so that is a good, somewhat good sign, but it needs to move up.
Doron? Anna? Yeah.
Thank you. My question is regarding about most, if not all of you have lived or are living now in the States. What is the responsibility of Israelis who live abroad in terms of seeing Israel kind of doing okay in terms of a startup nation, but going to the scale up or anything like that? Do Israelis that live abroad and succeed need to go back and contribute? Is there something like brain drain that actually hinders our ability to really become and achieve our full potential?
I think it's a very fair question. In fact, this week, on May 1st, the immigration services in the US will introduce a new visa for Israelis, which I think will make the situation even more complicated for Israel in terms of keeping talent, because a lot of more, now every company in the US that has an ownership of 50% or more by Israeli people or entities will be able to bring any Israeli they want for a manager position, and this person and their spouse and children will get a visa, and the spouse will get a working permit. So I think this is going to move the needle, and we'll see thousands of more Israelis moving to the US in the next couple of years. And I think this is a fair problem. I myself look at this as I'm conflicted in this situation. I, on one hand, want to promote both the organization I started, and the US is the best place to raise money, is the best place to create those partnerships, and I feel like this is the right place to be in order to create the best value for the companies. On the other hand, I do know that eventually the idea, the very deep notion of living in Israel and creating your value and impact there in Israel is something that's really important to me. I will not live my life in the United States, and we don't give our participants visas that allow them to stay in the United States. We insist on them getting B1 visas that say they come here as tourists, they participate in the program, and they go back. It's a bigger of a problem in places like Jerusalem, where a lot of the most talented young people I know are moving because they don't want to live in this tension. Mm-hmm. And I think that Israel, my theory about this is, again, at the risk of being provocative, is that the American dream, in its very essence, for young people the West see today in 2019, is that if you go to the best university and you work very hard and you study one of those academic disciplines that are associated with high income in the future, and you finish at the top of your class, you will be on a trajectory over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years to create a wealthy family that will enjoy the fruit of this hard work that you put into this. Israel, in my opinion today, and this is, in my opinion, one of the reasons people go into startups, does not offer the same trajectory. If you go to the best law school in Israel, the Hebrew University Law School, or you go to the best engineering school, Technion, and you finish top of your class, you'll get a great job, and you will get a starting salary of anywhere between $100 to $110,000 or $20,000 a year, which is considered top-notch in Israel, and it will climb, but up to a point. It will climb up to the point of $140,000 or $150,000, and that's it. Unless you become partner and own an equity in that company, you will not make those Amazon Silicon Valley salaries of $500,000 or the Kendall Square starting salary after MBA of $250,000. It does not exist in Israel. And yet, at the same time, what does exist in Israel is tons of extremely capable young people who say, I want this. And therefore, Harvard Business School ends up with 45, I think, Israelis in every class. MIT, Sloan, probably not too far away on the numbers. And a lot of those people, even those who served as pilots or Navy commanders in the military, are saying, I want those 5 years at Amazon, I want those 10 years at McKinsey, and then I'm going to come back to Israel. Many of them don't. I think it's a real problem. I think it calls for innovation. I don't think a solution is in place.
I would just add, I did work for the Israel Brain Gain program that was at the Israeli Innovation Authority, which was trying to deal with this issue. And the truth is I have a little bit of a different perspective. I think that there actually is a lot of brain circulation going on, and I think it really drives the economy in a positive way. And even culturally, like what you were talking about Israelis not having that feeling that they can change society, but you get that from the American experience. I think that there's a really positive thing of this brain circulation and learning from other cultures and making connections that allow businesses to happen. I agree with you that if it passes a certain breaking point and we're losing, all of our talent, then that would be a problem. But I think at the current state, the situation on the ground is that there's actually just a lot of circulation, and it's positive.
I see the brain drain, and they come to Harvard, they come to MIT, they come to the other fine institutions, and the opportunity to live the American dream and to give their families opportunities are clearly much, much greater here. And that's not lost on any of them. So yes, they might go back, but truthfully, the ones I see after they graduate, and these are people who came from, again, whether it's the Air Force or Seyeret Matkal or whatever it is, most are not going back. Most are joining McKinsey. Most are looking to make a life here. And some will go back, but the majority will stay.
So
and it is a brain drain because, you know, it's easier to have the American dream in America than in Israel.
And so maintaining the innovation ecosystem over the long haul
It's important.
might require some other sorts of inputs, whatever those might be, but simply forcing people to stay there presumably is not. So,
True.
very, very interesting. So, any other, do we have? Please.
Shalom. Hi, my name is Angela, and I'm the VP of Global Business Development for Inti House. We actually have an upcoming event. We work closely. We are a Cambridge company. Our mission is to connecting local entrepreneurs, innovators with investors globally. And in mid-May, we will be hosting an event with Governor Baker and the Council's office on bridging the gap between Massachusetts, Israel, and China. But my question today is really great talk, thank you. I have two questions. Number one is what can American students also learn? Like we just touched upon on all the great things from, if anyone who read The Startup Nation, love it, and definitely Scale Up Nation. We hear a lot from Tel Aviv. When I was there, it feels like Cambridge, feels like seaports, actually more seaport and a little Cape Cod. And then also Jerusalem. And there's a lot of activities coming up from Haifa. So I want to hear, will we get more to learn, you know, from different areas, different cities from Israel, but also what can our students, you know, there's just so many great traits of the Israeli startups, and there's so many of them here in our schools, in our ecosystem. What can we, our American students, can learn? So that's one of my questions.
I honestly think the best thing they could learn is to not necessarily accept what is told, but to question, to challenge, and to try to find other ways to innovate. So again, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia, often students or the people starting companies will follow a certain process that in Israel they see as not necessarily the way to do it. So it's almost question everything. Question everything. Why are we doing it this way? Why not look at it from this angle? And that mindset is very different, especially for students from Asia. And most of my students come from Asia. For them, it's just so against the rules to question authority. It's mind-boggling. The notion of failure. Failure is okay, big deal. You lost some money. You don't even have to return it. It's not a loan, it's equity. You lost it, big deal, move on. In fact, the next VC will give you money because you tried and failed versus you never tried. But that mindset, the decision of, oh, I need to declare bankruptcy, you failed. That's how they view it. But in Israel, it's like, no, I learned. Yes, it's true that it didn't become a multi-million-dollar company, but you know, I learned and I employed some of my friends and we tried to move the technology a step further. And yeah, we declared bankruptcy, big deal. We're going to do it again. Magma is standing ready to give us more money. Bessemer is offering us a term sheet. We'll do it again. And the next time, we'll fail. Again? Yes, big deal. The third time, we'll exit for $300 million to McDonald's. But that mindset is foreign. In other parts of the world, the definition of bankruptcy and the stigma that it carries is unbelievable. So to kind of go and experience Israel, to see that you question everything, and failure is okay, big deal. You try again. That is important.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I'd like to ask each of you just to any closing remarks if you'd like to make. Sort of, what is this thing called innovation? These things that you're devoting your lives trying to cultivate.
To summarize what I saw at OGS with our companies, I think that the most meaningful traits among the entrepreneurs at OGS that were able to take their companies to the next level was entrepreneurial zeal and the understanding that they will need to create their own small ecosystem of supporters and partners, and this will not be granted for them and it will not be given to them. And when I saw people taking this even to the next level and creating companies with hundreds of employees, our companies at best have dozens of employees each, but not yet in this level, I think that the traits that I appreciate the most are, on one hand, the gumption and the sense of agency and the sense of I will create my own reality have been the most important in telling a story and creating a coalition of supporters. But then it does not mean that it will be resulted in the success that people hope for unless it is coupled with modesty, with the desire to learn from other people, with giving the respect to the cultures in which we operate. When I work with American private equity investors that manage $20 billion in their asset portfolio, I don't come and tell them, listen to me and to how I'm going to show you that what you know is not true. I come and I say, here is what I think, where we have a phenomenal opportunity. And this is why I believe this is a phenomenal opportunity. And I would like to know what you think about it. And I see this a lot of time, what creates partners rather than distances people. So I think that to couple the entrepreneurial zeal with a real genuine desire to become the best version of yourself and to optimize your own learning is as close as I come to an answer.
I would say I would close with, firstly, what gives me hope. I think that the role cities are, I mean, of course, I work for a city, but I think the roles that cities are playing in the world right now in terms of innovation is very interesting and very inspiring and can have a lot of impact because it's on a smaller level and it's more local and cities are often not subject to some of the issues of national politics, although sometimes they are. So that gives me hope. And I think that the idea of innovation is seeing the possible where it seems impossible and looking at something from a different angle and trying something new. And that also gives me hope that that type of thinking can maybe help us solve some really deep challenges. And the idea of startup is to just start, is to just do it. And the just do it attitude, I think, is something that exists where I live in Tel Aviv, and I'm hoping we can use those to solve some really deep issues.
Yeah, so I guess the way at MIT we define innovation is bringing an idea to impact. So how do you create something that is durable, bringing in this idea that you have to impact on society through the launch of a company and entrepreneurship. And I think overall it's been extremely successful. I like to think, what if we didn't have Startup Nation? Where would Israel be? I think it would be far, far back, far back. If this spark of innovation that was led by various initiatives from the government, the Russian immigration, the military, the companies like Intel that found this talent there and attracted others. what if we didn't have Israel as a startup nation? What would Israel be? It would be a place where there's conflict, that's for sure. But would there be anything else that we would be proud of? So overall, I'm extremely proud of what Israel has been able to do and to position itself as a place where people all over the world look to, want to study and understand, where the heads of China want to really look to as they think about shepherding a population of 1.4 billion people around innovation. They look to Israel. They look to create partnerships with the Technion. I think it's an amazing accomplishment for a tiny country in the midst of a very difficult situation. So overall, I'm very proud.
So thank you. And I guess one final comment is that in addition to, thank you all. And for those of us, all of us here, right, who are teachers. So I think everything that you all said challenges us, not only in terms of how to think about talking about innovation in the classroom, teaching about it, but also seeing what are the ways in which we can bring innovation to our practice as educators. So thank you all very, very much.
So first, let me join not only in thanking the panel and thanking Yehudah Mirsky. Louis Brandeis, we have to mention him at least once in every conference. It's in our contract, but it's not a bad definition of innovation. Brandeis once said that most of the things worth doing in the world had been declared impossible before they were done. Innovators do what has previously been declared impossible, and in this session in particular, we have people who are trying to do the impossible, and really exciting to have you with us. I want to, just as we close, first of all, I want to thank our staff at Schusterman, my Associate Director, Shana, Associate Director, Risa Singer, and Karen, and Anna, and Wendy. This conference, too, people thought was impossible to pull off on this until it was done. I also want to thank my colleagues at IBS. It's really for us. Oh, there, Deborah. I'm not going to forget you this time. Deborah, there she is. Tremendously valuable. And Ben, who is my partner in crime at IBS. This is the first time, I hope, the first of many, when we have partnered Schusterman and IBS very successfully. Of course, I want to note our founding director, and so pleased for his encouragement and participation, Ilan Troen. And I really want to thank all of our speakers, some of whom came from great distances in order to be with us and who had a sense that this was very important. They appreciated what we were trying to do here and the multiplier effect. We heard that earlier in business, in education too. There is a multiplier effect, and our Schusterman Fellows in this room, I think, will be taking these ideas about innovation and in turn teaching it to their students. So this is really has been very exciting. To move from that level to the mundane, the bus will be leaving in 10 minutes, give or take, from the Loop Road. It's going to make 2 stops, one at the Charles River lot, and the second stop will be at Logan Airport. Please do not forget your luggage. It is across there in Feldberg, across. And those of you who are not going to the airport, please do not forget your luggage. You'd be surprised what's happened over the years, so be attached to it. The lunches you had, thanks to innovation, they're now dinner. So those of you who are wondering about dinner, please take a box. We paid for them. Take it. The venture capitalists have put it forth. So take it with you, and please. And I want to thank not only our fellows for coming great distances, but also many others from the community who have joined us and who have really helped to make this such a successful conference. I wish you a very good trip back. I hope you'll come back soon and see us again. This really is only the first of what I hope will be a series of conferences for fellows dealing with subjects that are not frequently enough dealt with in the field of Israel studies, really an attempt to broaden out what Israel studies can be and to bring the most innovative thinking to you and to the Brandeis community. Thank you for making this a great success. Have a wonderful trip.